assuring Americans that they're more likely to die in a bathtub accident than in a terror accident. And of course, he's right. But on the other hand, bathtubs aren't trying to get nuclear weapons. But the point he's making is that once you understand this idea of narrative building, which has always been something politicians and lawyers and advocates and columnists and commentators all try to do, it's a way to get you no longer thinking about some of the contradictory information that might cause you to rethink your position. And this explains perhaps better than anything why Secretary of State John Kerry suggested that, quote, perhaps the media would all do us a service if they didn't cover terrorism quite as much. People wouldn't know what's going on. I mean, when I first heard that, I thought, well, is he really saying that he doesn't want the press to do its job? And I think the point is that we don't really want people to see the contradictory evidence. And so this is why I think so often we do see individuals that when we see it as a terrorist attack, will go out of their way to say, first of all, it has nothing to do with Islam, nothing to do with radical Islam, and in more cases than not, oftentimes say that they're nothing more than homegrown lone wolves or self-radicalizing individuals, so that people will not conclude that Islam or radical Islam is the source of that particular action. And so this is something that he points out in this particular piece, because certainly President Obama is doing all he can to sort of minimize the whole issue of terrorism. Then he goes on and talks about the fact that just imagine if you were to say after Hillary Clinton or some maybe a Black Lives Matter individual were to talk about some of the concerns about black lives being killed, black men being killed by police officers, and he said, what might it entail if indeed you were to just simply say, in one particular case, that young black men are more likely to die in domestic accidents than in the hands of police. Of course, as he said, if a politician said that, liberals would attack him and her for minimizing the issue, just as conservatives attack Obama for his bathtub comments. And so I think one of the things I want to say just before we take a break is one of the very important lessons we try to pass on to you at Point of View is to actually evaluate the data and also have a level of discernment. And we're now moving into a time where we're having these, if you will, narrative building examples, and it's important for us to recognize that sometimes those are obscuring very important aspects of the truth. So again, we have posted those two articles for you, and if you'd like to join the conversation in the last half hour of this first hour, we would certainly welcome those calls, 1-800-351-1212. I want to get back into the campaign afterwards, after the break. One, certainly an interesting piece that's come out today on whether or not the debate was a political car crash, and then how to think about this vote. All that coming up right after this.
Does Point of View make any difference? I think Dr. Eric Walsh would say it does. Dr. Walsh was fired from his job as district health director for the state of Georgia, not because of anything he did or failed to do on the job, but because of sermons he preached in his local church. What does that have to do with Point of View? Jeremy Dice of First Liberty is representing Dr. Walsh in his effort to correct this apparent injustice. And Jeremy Dice became an attorney specializing in defending religious liberty greatly because of what he learned listening to Point of View radio as a child. That is the kind of difference you make when you support the Truth Team, but we can't make that difference without your help. Become a partner today in this important mission of speaking the truth in love. Click on Join the Truth Team at pointofview.net. Choose your giving level, stretch a bit. Please do it today. Pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join a conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We've put on all sorts of issues from prayer to narrative building, as well as the attempt to prevent the transfer of control of the internet. We're going to get into a few more. Karl Rove wrote a piece today on the debate was a political car crash. We'll read a little bit from Jim Garlow about if you're on the fence about your vote. This pastor, that is Jim Garlow, clarifies how the very future of America is at stake. Have some new Rasmussen reports and a variety of other issues. But let's go to some phone calls first. We'll go to Florida, WMSJ. Michelle, thank you for calling today. Michelle, you there? Well, we'll put Michelle on hold here. We'll see if we can get Michelle back in just a minute. And while we're doing that, let me just mention that Karl Rove's piece said the debate was a political car crash. 84 million Americans watched the debate on Monday. This is a piece that was in the Wall Street Journal. And if people were hoping for some new insight, they probably didn't get it. He points out that Hillary Clinton deftly and relentlessly attacked Donald Trump as unqualified and unfit for office, criticized his business practices and his refusal to release his tax returns. And he goes on to say that Donald Trump's retorts were flip and undisciplined. When Mrs. Clinton said that he got started in business by borrowing $14 million from his father, he dismissed it as a small loan. When she alleged that he paid nothing in federal taxes, Mr. Trump responded, "That makes me smart." But as he also points out, neither candidate shored up any principal weakness of area of weakness, I should say. Hillary Clinton failed to show why she represents significant change from President Barack Obama and his agenda, and Donald Trump actually effectively painted her as more of the same. But Donald Trump failed to reassure voters that he was up for the job, offering oftentimes, as Karl Rove says, tired sound bites. And was thin on substance and short on new details. So that's another one of those kind of post-debate analysis. That's what we can now see. We got Michelle here in Florida. Michelle, thanks for joining us today.
Hi. Sorry about that earlier, Kerby.
That's okay.
Hey, really appreciate your program. You're awesome. But couple things quickly. The fellow you had on yesterday speaking about the
George Barna, yes,
yeah, being able to speak about your current issues, and I had a question. When I start speaking about abortion with people, I get really emotional, and I know you speak with people all the time. So how do you keep your emotion in check with presenting your facts without really letting your emotion take over?
And I think part of it comes from having done it on college campuses for so many years in very hostile audiences. I don't think there's anything wrong with a little bit of emotion. I mean, in some respects, if somebody were just sort of in almost a Vulcan-like, I'm going to use a Star Trek reference for just a minute, in a non-emotional, logical way, present the case for life, for marriage, for religious liberty, for whatever it might be, and just do that in a monotone without any kind of passion or emotion, I think people would say, well, how seriously do you believe that? And I think most people that are pro-life are passionate, and they really can't even believe that we are in a world where we have destroyed more than the population of Canada inside the womb. If you want to talk about, now about 60 million abortions, I think a little emotion is okay. I think it's actually almost demanded of you to do that. Well, but then I try to find some arguments that are sort of common sense arguments. I recognize if I'm talking to somebody who's not a Bible believing person saying, well, the Bible says in Psalm 139, well, that's not going to work very well. But I might get them thinking about, okay, well, if we define death as the cessation of heartbeat, could you define life as the beginning of a heartbeat? Well, actually, the hearts form fairly early, and so oftentimes before a woman even knows she's pregnant, there's already a heart being formed in this developing baby, and abortion kills or stops a beating heart. That's a biological argument, a medical argument. Or you use brainwave activity. We use the cessation of brainwave activity to define death. Could you use the onset of brainwave activity to define life? Well, that's, again, life inside the womb. Or you could use legal arguments or philosophical arguments or things of that issue. But those are ways that I find maybe reach out. In other words, I'm using this to sort of to use kind of common sense arguments to come to, if you will, biblical conclusions. Our mistake sometimes as Christians is we use our biblical arguments first. I think we argue to our biblical convictions rather than argue from them. And so that's another kind of technique that I use just to get a person thinking about it, or even turn it personally. You know, aren't you glad your mother didn't abort you? You wouldn't even be here and having this conversation with me right now. You have to bring it out of the philosophical into the real, and you have to use some kind of common sense arguments. And really what I find is very quickly, most of the good arguments are on the side of the pro-life advocate, and that's why pretty soon they devolve into name-calling or talking about a woman's right or something like that, because really, in your heart of hearts, I think even natural law written on our hearts tells us we're killing things in the womb. We know we are.
Yeah. Well, I do get passionate about it, and I guess I don't get overly crazy or anything, but I do, and I guess that's a God Spirit moving thing, so I'm thankful for it. And quickly changing the subject, Kerby, I wanted to let you know my daughter and I went to the Trump rally that was here in Melbourne, Florida.
Very good. What'd you think? Yeah, I'm listening.
Yeah, you got so quiet on me.
No, I'm just letting you talk.
We were. I was amazed personally. I drove down there, and I'm thinking, a couple hundred people, and it was just amazing. Totally packed out. I understand that there were, I don't know, supposedly thousands of people that could. I know we waited in a huge line. We were fortunate to get in. Quickly, just would say. There was such a spirit of like patriotism and unity, and just talking about good things for the country, jobs and homeland security and things that are good. And I left there. My daughter and I were talking about it on the way home, and I said, I don't understand how anybody could be against anything that was said there. It's good. Like truth, things that are necessary for the good of the country, and it was a wonderful crowd. People were just happy to be together, talking about the good of the country, and I was glad it was worth every bit of the hassle, the parking, the crowd. Everyone was so kind, and they wouldn't let us bring our umbrellas in. Everyone had to leave everything there in a pile, at security.
Wow.
And when we came out, lo and behold, there's the umbrella. There's the Vera Bradley umbrella. Okay, so we were just like awesome. It was, even if we wouldn't have got it back, I would be still happy to have gone. And am I crazy about the man? But this is what we have. So I'm going to just keep praying. And I do, like others mention, pray for him, pray for the Clintons, pray for the president. I like to say there's hope for everybody.
Well, if nothing else, what you're seeing right now is why the Clinton campaign is in panic over Florida. And I'm reading this from Politico. Clinton campaign in panic mode over Florida black voters, and that's the one from yesterday. But just the lack of enthusiasm in different segments of the Florida turnout, and this is so different because you go to a Trump rally, there seem to be a lot of very energized individuals. And yet, in order for Hillary Clinton to win Florida, she needs a turnout in the African-American community that is comparable, maybe not equal, but at least comparable to what Barack Obama received the last two times. And there's not a lot of evidence that that's happening simply because there's a lot less voter enthusiasm, and that one is on the black voter. But then when you look at just voters overall in Florida, not as much enthusiasm. So if indeed that trend continues, Donald Trump wins Florida, and those electoral votes are going to be very important if he becomes the next president. So, Michelle, I appreciate you giving us an on the scene look at the Trump rally, and we're going to see if we can get a few more phone calls in here. Let's go to Texas, KBJS. Patricia, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Well, I did get and I thought Trump missed so many opportunities to hush her up. That, when he was talking about her stamina, and she said that she sat through all those hours of, I don't know the term, what they call that, grilling by
Yep.
Gowdy and all them people.
11 hours.
All he had to do was say, if you'd done your job right and had told those awful lies, you wouldn't have had to sit through those in the first place.
Yeah, you're 11 hours in front of them, pale in comparison to the 13 hours of those who ended up losing their lives. Yeah, I mean,
yeah, that's right.
Isn't that a great line? I would have used that line like that, something like that.
That one and the one that you wouldn't have had to sit there in the first place. You done your job right and not lied.
Good line.
And then the other thing was talking about thinking on the child care and stuff with her little daughter's birthday and got her to thinking, which is malarkey. You just want to say, I'm so thankful, though, that your daughter didn't abort her. Like, you're lucky to have a granddaughter, with your attitude about abortion. So.
Sure. Okay, we're going to take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Along the side of the road in the Pennsylvania town of Shikshini is a small sign. On the sign appear the words, Bible Baptist Church welcomes you 1 block, and it features a Bible, a cross, and an arrow pointing in the direction of the church. The sign has been on the side of the road since 2008 when the City Council approved its placement there at the cost of the church, replacing a sign that had been standing nearby since the 1980s. The individual complaining about the sign was the lone vote on the City Council against its placement when the Council approved its placement in 2008. She also happens to be able to see the sign from her home. She filed this lawsuit 4 years after the sign was erected, alleging that the sign was a religious sign, and since the City Council approved of its placement and permitted it to reside on the side of the road, the town was violating the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. The court agreed that the sign was a religious sign, but it dismissed the lawsuit anyway. The court said that no reasonable observer could conclude that a sign pointing out the direction to a church building could be the government's way of establishing a religion in violation of the First Amendment. Rather, to quote the court, a reasonable observer would think it is a sign to a church, and nothing more. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes this hour, and then in the second hour we're going to change topics for a little while to look at why the Christian classical education students are doing so well around the country. And we're going to give you some good examples, and we'll get back into the news. But especially those of you thinking about your children's education in the future, I thought you'd really appreciate that conversation, which, by the way, I think will show up from time to time in this presidential and congressional debate, because there have been people talking about, well, we've improved the public schools, or the charter schools are doing better. Well, yeah, but let's look at how the best and the brightest are doing through some of these classical Christian education programs, and I think you'll have a much higher standard that we need to achieve if we're going to have students compete in the global market. But let's go back to the phones, give a few more of you a chance to join the conversation. We'll head to South Carolina this time. Jerry, listening on WAGP. Jerry, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Kirby, I was amazed when I got back in the truck and I heard you using the identical argument I've used with people who are pro-choice.
Well, that is good. I guess
children.
the two of us are pretty smart people then, right?
Well, I'm a horticulturalist. I've also used arguments about sowing oak an oak seed has the same genome as an oak tree.
That's
you
right.
wouldn't think of saying that it is not an oak tree. You can see it if you dissect it, or a lima bean, you can see the seed that's the young plant in there. It's the same thing with people, and people have gotten that.
Very good. Again, I've used these arguments in various debates over the years. As a matter of fact, I have a whole section in my book, Christian Ethics in Plain Language. Of course, you can go to the website that we have at probe.org, and I have arguments against abortion. I give you medical arguments against abortion, legal arguments against abortion,
right.
philosophical arguments against abortion. Of course, there are biblical arguments as well. But if you're doing a debate, and I remember doing one at the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville, debating a leading abortionist, when I walked into that room, which had, 300 to 500 students and faculty, could I assume anybody in there had a biblical worldview? Well, maybe a handful, but most of them didn't. So you have to use common sense arguments. Biblical arguments are ones that need to maybe be held to the very end so that you're arguing to your biblical conclusions, but you're using common sense arguments that whether you're a Christian or not, whether you're a liberal, a conservative, an independent, a Republican, or Democrat, whatever, you can see there's some very compelling arguments. And those that you just mentioned and many others, a lot of these are medical arguments. The moment of conception, you have a child that is genetically different from the mother. So when my abortionist debater was saying, well, you can't really separate, sperm and egg and embryos. I go, yes, you can. Bad biology. Before fertilization, you have haploid. When you have fertilization, you have diploid. You have 46 chromosomes. That makes a human being. And so you're using the same kind of arguments I am. But go ahead.
Another thing is on the Trump debate, which I've heard people saying Trump lost. My 8th grade son and I were watching that on the internet because of social studies, for his social studies, and he came away a much stronger Trump supporter. He's already in charge of the pro-Trump team in his class, but I was about 80% anti-Hillary and pro-Supreme Court and only 20% Trump. I'm now probably 40% Trump because of that debate.
Yeah, I think it confirmed in a few people, a few issues, but it raised some, as I just mentioned a minute ago. I was quoting from Karl Rove. He can do a whole lot better if he's going to be the next president. He has got to assure people that he really understands or has a general grasp of some of these issues, and he needs to stop telling us how rich he is. Okay, we figured that out a long time ago. Don't waste words on things that don't matter, and don't worry about Miss Universe. Now we're finding out all things about her that we know that was a real disaster on the part of the Clinton campaign and the rest. But the latest Rasmussen poll shows that most voters, or at least I should say, this is a better way to say it, more voters think that Hillary Clinton is qualified for the presidency than Donald Trump. But don't think it's very much, because it's like 46% think she's qualified, 48% don't think she's qualified. So it's not like the American people just give her an overwhelming percentage of kind of feeling of confidence with her. But instead, what you're finding is he needs to at least raise that level of confidence that people have in him to a higher level, and he does that by being in command of some facts and not always trying to wing it. So we'll see how this next debate goes.
Yeah, and we just have to pray for him to develop common sense.
Well, that's for sure. And again, pray for the two candidates, whether it's Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. I mean, one of those individuals will be our next president, and this is a source of real concern. Because when you look at that stage, you say, really? Is that the best we're going to do? Well, that's what we have right now. And I didn't have a chance today to read from Jim Garlow. Maybe we could post it, but he has 18 different points on if you're on the fence about your vote, here's how to think about this, but I might mention maybe two since they've maybe three since they've come up. The first one he mentions is the remarkable difference between the Democratic and Republican Party platforms. The 51-page Democratic platform is more liberal than any platform the Democrats have ever put forward. And in some ways, he calls it socialist. You can come to your own conclusions, but I would encourage you to read it. And if you don't want to read all of it, we have in our latest Outlook magazine some very good summaries of that. When you look at the 54-page Republican platform, probably one of the strongest on life and marriage and issues that relate to where your family is and religious liberty and the rest. So that's point number one. Number two, the one we've been talking about, this issue of abortion. Donald Trump has moved pro-life and certainly has appointed so far as his vice presidential nominee one of the most pro-life members of Congress, who was one of the very first to actually try to defund Planned Parenthood. Hillary Clinton, on the other hand, honors Planned Parenthood and supports it. So you have a remarkable difference there. And then the point that Jerry just made a minute ago, and that has to do with the Supreme Court. We are talking about a Supreme Court that is going to undergo a remarkable and significant change. That change will take place not just in the next few years, but for a long time, because we already have one vacancy. So Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump will, after they raise their hand and are sworn in as President of the United States, will immediately set out to replace that individual, that open seat. But almost immediately after that, you're going to have some others. Ruth Bader Ginsburg is 83. She's not in good health. Anthony Kennedy is 80. Stephen Breyer is 78. And we can go down the list and say that it's possible that the next Supreme Court will be completely comprised of the various appointees put forward by either Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. And the difference between those two is, again, very significant. So this is a significant election, and if you'd like to read all 18 points, Jim Garlow has this published in a number of venues. I think it was in Charisma and some other places where I found it, and we can even post it on the website if you'd like. And he takes you through how he's answered what he calls the question. It's the question people always ask. It's the question I'm asked oftentimes when I go out and speak as well. So those are a couple of key issues. We'll come back to the campaign. So if some of you want to make some comments about Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton, and maybe even the last half hour, I'll read a little bit from Jim Garlow again, since we'll have some time. We will do that. But when we come back, I'm going to spend just a little bit of time talking about how many of these Christian colleges and these classical Christian education programs in various schools have produced students that are doing so very well. And so this is one of the articles that we have posted on the website, pointofview.net. It's under the listing Christian Classical Education, and I would encourage you to read that, because if you're thinking about where you want to put your children or grandchildren, this is something else to think about. All sorts of great material on our website today, pointofview.net. Pray, organize, and vote. We still have, of course, been advertising and talking about this Alaska cruise, which will take place in August. But we need to take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
This election has been one of the most divisive in history. Even close friends have been driven apart because they dared support the wrong candidate. Jesus said the world would know his disciples by how they love each other. I'm asking you to do something today as a sign of unity. Step up and support the Truth Team at Point of View Radio so we can be a beacon of truth in 2016 and beyond. America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. Visit pointofview.net. Make a difference by giving as generously as you can, or call us 800-347-5151. Our next president will likely appoint at least 2 Supreme Court justices, maybe even more. We need each other, and I believe that we need Point of View, and Point of View needs you to invest in the mission. Please join us today. pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour, we'll continue some of the conversation we had in the first hour, but first I wanted to maybe interrupt some of the things we've been talking about in the culture and talk about something that I found fascinating, and that is when we get into this issue of education, which we talk about so often here on Point of View, we are beginning to notice that students that have been educated using the Christian classical education model, which again we've had people in studio to talk about, that they do so much better. And if we're going to, or even during these campaigns, hear about how we need to improve the public schools, I don't hold any hope that they will teach from a Christian point of view, or they will even teach the classics. But I am hoping that those of you that are concerned about the educational opportunities for your children or grandchildren might once again look at this model of classical Christian education, if for no other reason than how effective the students that graduate from it are doing. So let's, if we can, for just a few minutes, focus on this, and then we'll get back to some of the issues in the news. We bring to the microphone Dr. Steve Turley, holds a Ph.D. from Durham University, an internationally recognized scholar, speaker, blogger, and also a prize-winning classical guitarist. He's the author of over 7 books, and I might mention just a few: Awakening Wonder, A Classical Guide to Truth, Goodness, and Beauty, and The Ritualized Revelation of the Messianic Age, to mention just a few. He blogs on church and society. He is a faculty member of Tall Oaks Classical School in Newcastle, Delaware, and we've posted his piece on classical Christian education on our website, pointofview.net. Dr. Turley, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, hi, Kerby. It's great to be with you. Thank you so much for having me.
First thing you talk about is the Patrick Henry College. Now, of course, we have lots of connections to that school and the individuals that have been responsible for that. And then you go on to talk about, of course, what's happening both at the college level and the high school level. But it does all come back to this model of a classical Christian education. Can you kind of explain what that entails?
Yeah, by classical, we generally refer to educating students in the 3 grand values we know as truth, goodness, and beauty. And we call it classical because these values go back to the 3 great cities of Jerusalem, Athens, and Rome, which exercised an enormous influence in the development of Western society, from our philosophical and legal categories, our conceptions of history, art, architecture, music, science, mathematics. And so with this emphasis on truth, goodness, and beauty, classical education emphasizes educating the entire person. So students are trained in memory and critical thinking and logic, but as a means for forming and shaping the student's virtues, which is to love what's truly lovely and desire what's truly desirable, and hence experience human flourishing. And of course, in Christian terms, this means understanding all expressions of truth, goodness, and beauty in light of the redemption of the entire cosmos in Christ. So classical Christian education involves educating the student in the true, the good, and the beautiful in such a way so as to foster distinctively human virtues and enable our faith to flourish.
So again, we're talking about something a little different than even your typical, quote, Christian education. And
That's
yet
right.
I am seeing this at a number of different levels. I, for example, up until just recently, and I've rotated off the board, but I've been on the board of the West Dallas Community School, which is actually in a relatively impoverished part of Dallas, and yet they use, again, this Christian classical education model and are educating these young people. And so it isn't just something for kind of the rich, elite suburban kids. If anyone is willing to take some of these models that exist and some of the curriculum that's available and go back to the way in which we used to educate young people, we're turning out some incredible students, aren't we?
Oh, we certainly are, and that's what's so exciting. I'm so proud of Patrick Henry and what they're doing. My colleagues at the Ambrose School and the Logos schools, I write about there, and in the petition of these mock trials, this involves knocking out schools like Yale and Duke and University of Virginia. So these are just amazing achievements that, as I point out, are just becoming par for the course among classical schools. And so I wrote an article that really just dives into why this is. Mm-hmm. Why is it that these small classical schools, whose budgets can't even compare with these other schools, why are they so successful and so consistently stomping the competition?
And there would be some people, Dr. Turley, that would say, well, that's because, Michael Ferris started Patrick Henry, and he's a brilliant lawyer, so he's training all these kids to be able to articulate from a legal point of view. But that isn't necessarily the case, because what you're talking about are certainly those that are getting some legal training, but they're just reading the classics, which, by the way, were the classics that were read by some of the founders of our country. True?
Oh, absolutely. I think one of the things we have to come to terms with is that our whole understanding of an educated person today has changed dramatically over the last century. We have to remember that universities were founded originally by the church, by monasteries. They're the ones who had the libraries. So we're talking the University of Paris in the 12th century, followed by Oxford, Cambridge. And in our own nation, 114 of the first 118 colleges founded were established as Christian colleges for the propagation of the gospel. And so it's in this Christian context, which dominated university life for nearly 1,000 years, an educated person was considered a virtuous person. And this is why the classical liberal arts were at the center of education. Through the reading of the great books and appreciating great music and art and poetry, we learn what it means to be truly human, particularly as our humanity has been restored in the redemptive work of Christ. This was the distinctively Western conception of the human person. We see this with the education of our founding fathers. As a matter of fact, before the Revolution, I found a nice little stat here. The most widely published text beside the Bible was the Westminster Confession of Faith, yes, composed by the English Puritans in the 17th century. This was the centerpiece in the New England Primer, which was the primary school book for children in the 18th and 19th centuries. So it's tempting to think that all we're doing here is, as it were, professionalizing these students, just teaching them the right techniques, the right things to say. But something much deeper is going on here. I think what we're doing is we're recovering a classical conception of the educated person, and that was one who cultivated Christian virtue.
When we come back from the break, I want you to maybe address the issue that might be in the minds of some. This is not unfamiliar territory for me, as you might imagine, or really for most of our listeners if they've listened to this program for some time. But there may be some that are new listeners or others are saying, well, okay, I understand classical, but how do you put the Christian part in here? Classical, that's all the Greeks, and it's all this pagan stuff, and how does that fit? And so I want you to maybe take us through what you talk about in your article about kind of the Christian meta-narrative from creation to consummation and how that fits together, because even though I suspect some understand that you can have a classical Christian education, sometimes those seem like they're at war with each other or they're very different kind of philosophies. So I'd love to have you address that issue. And let me just mention as we're going to the break that we have more information that you can find out about Dr. Steve Turley. We have a link to turleytalks.com. I think you're really going to enjoy that. When we come back, we'll have him talk a little bit about what they will find there. And then we have this article that appeared in certainly Christian Post, and it will help you understand a little bit more about some of these very important issues. Why are Christian classical education students stomping the competition? Pretty amazing when you look at Patrick Henry College, and their students are outdoing students at Yale and Duke, University of Virginia. If you'd like to know more, we'll be back right after this.
– 'This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson. 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 'This is Viewpoints with Kerby Ander
The percentage of teenagers suffering from hearing loss has jumped by a third in a little over a decade. That's the conclusion of researchers writing in the Journal of the American Medical Association. They drew numbers from the government's National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, and adjusting for factors such as age, race, and exposure to infections that could damage the ear, they found a slow but significant rise in hearing loss. The researchers were unwilling to jump to the conclusions most of us would draw from the results. While they acknowledged that hearing loss could be due to listening to iPods and other portable music devices, they couldn't rule out other factors ranging from exposure to loud noises to nutrition to exposure to toxins. Hearing loss has also been linked to slower language development, as well as to poorer performance in school and lower self-esteem. And social skills are dependent upon language, so that the long-term impact most likely will be a progressively lower set of scores in communication tests and greater anxiety. Now, although the researchers were unwilling to draw too many conclusions, let me venture into this area. For example, there was a study in Australia that noticed a correlation between hearing loss and using a portable music player, such as an iPod or other music player. Another study in New York documented that more than half the college students were listening to these players above the recommended exposure. And of course, we should also add that teenagers often go to loud concerts and other noisy events such as NASCAR races. When you think about it, we shouldn't really be surprised by these findings. Loud portable music players may not be the only reason for hearing loss, but they certainly are a significant reason. Parents need to tell their kids to turn down the volume. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Dr. Steve Turley with us for just a few more minutes. And again, if you'd like to join our conversation, let me open the phones. If you have some comments about education, maybe you are actually involved with a Christian classical educational program, or your children are, I'd love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212, and then we'll get back into some of the issues in the news. But I wanted to, most importantly, encourage you to get a copy of this article. We've posted it on the website. Why are Christian classical education students stomping the competition? It appeared in Christian Post. It's just 2 pages, but again, something you might want to read, but also maybe pass on to other teachers or those even that are thinking about whether or not they might want to do something to improve the educational program that maybe is happening in your Christian school or your church. But, okay, Steve, let's, if we can, maybe answer the question that people have in their minds, or at least some do. When I think of classical education, I think of Plato, I think of Aristotle, I think of a number of people that aren't Christians. I think of even some of the great classics of the Renaissance, Reformation, Enlightenment. What about this? How do I put Christian together with this idea of classical education?
A great question. I think it's very much at the heart of why we've seen so much success among these classically Christian-educated students. Basically, at the heart of classical education was the study of rhetoric. And rhetoric was a lot more than just learning to speak well. In order to study rhetoric in the classical world, you had to study certain books, poets, histories. You had to practice certain music, art, sport. And that's what, therefore, was happening, is that rhetoric created a common life world. It birthed a distinctive kind of culture. And when Christianity came on the scene, it, too, was very interested in rhetoric, primarily via the homily, the sermon. it too was interested in thinking through the world in terms of poets and books and histories and music, art, and sport. But they sort of moved it away from the Greek canon, Homer and Hesiod, or with the Latins, Virgil, and so on, and they centered it around the Scriptures, the Old and New Testament. And so what then happens is they keep the curriculum, but they radically reorganize it around brand new assumptions about the world. So, for example, the Greeks didn't care very much about the body. The body was something that you throw off and you go and join the spirit world, as it were. Christians said, no way, creation is good and it's beautiful and the body is good, and God actually became incarnate in the human body and forever is the Theanthropos, the God-man in Christ. So basically what you see in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th centuries is Christians taking very, very seriously what scholars call a totalizing discourse, where the whole world, history, art, music, literature, economics, I'm thinking of the intro to your radio station, the whole world is reconfigured now as being incorporating the transformative life, death, and resurrection of Christ. And this was the vision of education that was the default vision in the West for over 1,500 years and built much of what we take for granted today.
We sometimes around this table talk about what's called the trivium, the grammar, logic, and rhetoric. You focused, of course, on one aspect of that rhetoric, but it does seem to me that whether you want to use the Latin term trivium or whatever, you recognize that there are certain stages that children in their development, physiological and intellectual development, go through. And it does seem to me that your classical Christian education actually matches up with that much better than what has been, of course, the secular education that we've inherited from John Dewey and a variety of other individuals.
That's right. That's a great observation. Classical education, in many respects, is a journey, and it's a lifelong journey. We would say an eternal journey in many respects, where it's the blossoming of full human personhood. So we start what we call the grammar stage. All kids have this amazing memory. I mean, they can memorize the presidents in a night. It's just stunning. They can memorize genealogies and so forth. Well, we tap into that. And through the grammar stage, say like kindergarten to 5th, 6th grade, they're memorizing facts. And then they get to the stage where they start questioning things. And every parent knows that the child goes into 6th grade or 7th grade, and all of a sudden they look at you and go, well, why? Why do I have to do that? They want reasons. They want to argue why they should not be able to, and so forth. So it's in that stage we start teaching them how to think. It's technically known as dialectic. Better and simpler way of thinking of it is a logic stage where they emphasize critical thinking. And then when they hit in the pubescent period, 13, 14, 15, that's when you start seeing them begin to be very concerned about beauty and how they look. And that's where we focus in on rhetoric and the ability to speak well and how to analyze music and how to love what's truly lovely and desire what's truly desirable. So in many respects, there's sort of a truth, goodness, beauty pattern to education that when they then do graduate and they get out there, boy, is it showing its fruit.
Just before we run out of time, let's talk about what you have noticed as certainly an individual that has had connections, at least professionally and others, with everything from the Patrick Henry School, the Ambrose School, the Logos School, and others, in terms of student enrollment, because this, which before was almost embryonic, has grown rather dramatically, hasn't it, in the last few years?
It has, and it's wonderful. It's back in the early 90s, there were only about 10 classical Christian schools around. It was inspired. It started with Doug Wilson out in Idaho, and he was inspired by Dorothy Sayers' essay, Lost Tools of Learning. That was in the 1980s. And then since 94, I think there were 10 schools. Now it's burst open to over 230. And that's just associated with the Association of Classical Christian Schools. When you go even beyond that, I mean, I think I've heard some numbers of over 500. It's made its way out into 10 different countries through the Rafiki program in Africa, and it's even making its way back into Europe, where it's, in many respects, sort of all began. So we're seeing nothing less than, I think, a real civilizational renaissance in Christian education.
Before we let you go, let's, if we can, talk about it's on your website, turleytalks.com. And it's easy to spell, but even so, we have the link. So in case you can't spell it or you're driving right now, Turley Talks. First of all, you can download a free ebook, Stressed Out, Learn How an Ancient Christian Practice Can Relieve Stress and Overcome Anxiety. But also for people that would like to follow your blog or to learn about other books and other things, podcasts and all the rest, talk about what they will find when they land at turleytalks.com.
Yeah, thank you for that. Well, Turley Talks, it really was founded for Christians who are deeply concerned about the state of our society, and they're looking for answers that can effectively awaken a secular world to the social and cultural richness of the Christian faith. And so we've dedicated a website to just that, blog posts, free ebook downloads, videos, podcasts, that expose all the various ways in which we are all unfortunately guilty of relying on and expecting the secular world to do and accomplish what only the church endowed with the Holy Spirit can. And then we provide the answers and resources that enable Christians to effectively recalibrate social and cultural life back around the shared life world of the church so as to enable their faith to flourish. So it's a deep and it's a rich website with lots and lots of resources.
If somebody listening says, we would maybe need to think about using this kind of curriculum in our Christian school that already exists, or if they're thinking about, I would really like to start a Christian classical education school, would it be possible for them to contact you?
Oh, of course. They can go right through my website at turleytalks.com, and there is an email there where they can get in touch with me. Absolutely.
Well, again, I thought this was a great article in Christian Post, something we've talked about before, and just, again, amazing how well these students are doing that have graduated or are currently in a Christian classical education program, and they've done extremely well, and I think will continue to do so. So, Dr. Steve Turley, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thanks so much, Kerby. God bless you.
Going to take a break, and when we come back, I'll get into a few more issues, but if you were waiting to make a comment in that first hour, let me open up the phones again. Last half hour, we'll have an open line. I've got a couple more things to put on the table. We've already talked about everything from prayer to the internet to a variety of other issues, and of course, we'll get back into the campaign. I'll read a little bit more from that piece by Jim Garlow. A new study coming out as well about how some of the facts and figures dealing with gun control aren't really very accurate, so we'll get into that as well. And if you would like to know more about some of these issues, feel free to visit the website, pointofview.net. As you go there, don't forget that we are now, this week, starting to publicize that the first full week in August, we will be involved in a cruise to Alaska. And this will not only involve me, but also Penna Dexter and Kelly Shackelford. It'll be sort of like our Friday roundtable, except we're going to be on the boat with you for an entire week. What a great opportunity to interact with all sorts of different individuals, not only you, but also to ask questions about some of the people I get a chance to talk to on our Fridays. And so please take the time to visit our website, pointofview.net. And this might be something that would be a great cruise and a great opportunity for you to get to know us and for us to get to know you as we explore Alaska. We're looking forward to it. All that is available on our website, pointofview.net. We'll come back with more right after this.
Does point of view make any difference? I think Dr. Eric Walsh would say it does. Dr. Walsh was fired from his job as district health director for the state of Georgia, not because of anything he did or failed to do on the job, but because of sermons he preached in his local church. What does that have to do with point of view? Jeremy Dice of First Liberty is representing Dr. Walsh in his effort to correct this apparent injustice. And Jeremy Dice became an attorney specializing in defending religious liberty greatly because of what he learned listening to Point of View Radio as a child. That is the kind of difference you make when you support the Truth Team, but we can't make that difference without your help. Become a partner today in this important mission of speaking the truth in love. Click on Join the Truth Team at pointofview.net. Choose your giving level, stretch a bit. Please do it today. Pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We're kind of in debate season, and we've already had one presidential debate. By this time next week, we'll be talking about the first and only vice presidential debate. And then there will be, of course, a debate over the weekend, and then some conversation about that on Monday, and then one more. So you have 3 presidential debates, of which we've had one, a vice presidential debate. And one of the issues that we have yet to really talk about is the issue of gun control. And there are very few people right now that will use the phrase gun control simply because it has not been a winner. As a matter of fact, it's been a very significant loser at the ballot box. So you sometimes hear things like common sense gun control or common sense gun regulations or something of that nature. You heard, again, Hillary Clinton talking about keeping military-style assault weapons or those kinds of phrases either out of the campaign trail or even in the debate, because there is always a need to make them seem scary. So that's why I thought it might be good for just a minute to quote from a piece that appeared in the Washington Examiner by Jason Russell. It's entitled "Rifles, 99% of the gun control debate, 2% of the murders." And he says, while most of the gun control debate focuses on the debate over banning assault weapons, data from the FBI shows such weapons are involved in only a tiny proportion of the nation's murders. Although assault weapon has no formal definition, most guns that would be thought of as assault weapons are types of rifles. Yet the FBI data shows that in 2015, rifles were the weapon used in less than 2% of all murders. And if you sort out those, which would actually be just considered like a hunting rifle or something like that, from the ones that are oftentimes identified as so-called assault weapons or military-style weapons or whatever the phrase is used, which has no formal definition. The definition of an assault weapon is something that looks scary to me, or something that's like an AR-15 or an AK-47, something of that nature. But he goes on to say that firearms were involved in 72% of all murders, which I think would surprise a lot of people. Some murders have nothing to do with guns at all. They have to do with all sorts of other things, knives, explosions, whatever. We can go through all of that. Of the murders involving firearms, 67% involved handguns, while less than 3% involved rifles. And so you are talking about a very small percentage indeed, especially when you get down to those that would actually be called assault weapons. So recognize that when you hear Hillary Clinton or someone else talk about we need to get these guns out of the hands of individuals, everybody's willing to do that, but they weren't willing to do, stop and frisk, which we talked about the other day when we kind of did a post-debate analysis. But he points out that, again, when you look at the numbers, it's kind of interesting because for those of you wanting to take notes, we have about 310 million civilian guns in America, if you use the 2009 statistic. 114 are handguns, while 110 million are rifles. So 114 million handguns, 110 million rifles. That doesn't add up to 310, so I assume the others would be like shotguns or things of that nature. Handguns are a much more common weapon in murders, yet few try to ban them. I mean, if you are even in the I believe we need gun control mindset, you don't want to focus on something that is responsible for less than 2% or 2%, depending on which particular statistic you look at, of all the murders. You would like to look at what? The 98%. But he points out that politically, handguns are harder to ban than rifles. The small size of handguns makes them more feasible for use in self-defense situations. A feeble grandmother probably can't handle a rifle, but a small handgun can be a little easier. And so he points out that whether you're looking at rifles and assault weapons, they look scary, and politically it's much more popular to ban them, but the facts show that rifles are really just a small and tiny part of the problem. So something else to think about and to evaluate as you're seeing some of these debates. It came up a little bit in this debate between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. I'll make a next week between Mike Pence and Tim Kaine, and the reason for that is they are very definitely on opposite sides on these issues. Mike Pence has always been kind of a strong Second Amendment kind of individual, and when you talk about Tim Kaine, he says, I can't think of an issue that I'd like to be more associated with than the issue of gun control. So unless you have totally incompetent moderators, and actually we're going to have pretty good moderators for the vice presidential debate, I think this issue will come up again. So just giving you a little bit of background information to think about as you watch that debate. And of course, we'll give you all sorts of coverage and evaluation as we've heard the debate. We'll play some of those clips next week and get into that as well. Just before I run out of time, though, let me take just a few more minutes to go through this piece by Jim Garlow, because he says he's been asked the question so many times about, well, can I vote for Donald Trump? Can I vote for Hillary Clinton? How do I think this through? And so, again, he says, I followed every national convention, Republican and Democrat, from the time I was 9 and attended most of the Republican conventions from 1984 to present. As I mentioned, he has 18 points. We won't go through all of them, but the first one is, again, a very important one to look at, and that is the Democratic and Republican Party platforms. He says the 51-page Democratic platform is the most leftist platform ever. It contains many points, he says, that are anti-biblical, and you can go through and read the piece if you want to see why he would say that. By contrast, the 54-page Republican platform is one of the strongest Republican platforms ever. He says a biblically alert person would be comfortable with almost all of it. And he goes on to say something that's important, and that is party platforms are a big issue to me, although some blow off party platforms, I do not. Nor do many people up and down the ballot who are running for office. This is a serious and very important item. I have a hard copy of both platforms in front of you now. Most people have never checked out what their party platforms say. They should. If a person is not drawn to the top of the ballot candidate, they ought to at least consider voting for the candidate attached to the best party platform. And again, if you're not familiar how these platforms are put together, they really start at the precinct level. After you vote, you go to your precinct meeting. That precinct meeting is where you can put forward some resolutions. Now, lots of times there are various resolutions that are even proposed by other individuals. Then they actually have a senatorial meeting, and then they have a state meeting. And so then you can, whatever state you're located in, actually begin to look at what that particular party platform was for the state of Texas or Massachusetts or Alabama or Mississippi or Illinois or Georgia, whatever it might be, and then those are coalesced into the national party platform. And because of the influence not only of the people that supported Hillary Clinton, but also the people that supported Bernie Sanders, you have in 2016 a platform for the Democratic Party that is even more liberal, even more progressive, even more, dare I use the word socialist, than the one in 2012. And don't take my word for it. Even people in the Democratic Party have said that. I've quoted from William Galston and others that have said that. So one of the things to look at, of course, is this issue of party platforms. Another he deals with is, well, both candidates are flawed. He says, I know that. But permit me an analogy. And Jim Garlow is the pastor of Skyline Church in San Diego, so this analogy fits pretty well with him. He says, as a pastor, I would rather deal with a church attendee who is blatant and brash in his sinning than one who is devious, lying, cunning, and deceptive. Both are problematic, but one is easier to deal with than the other. If I were a pastor bringing correction to a parishioner, I would prefer dealing with a Trump type any day over a Hillary type. The chances of making progress with a Trump type are many times greater than a Hillary type. Never heard anybody make that comment before, but nevertheless, that's one of his as well. Then he goes through and talks about how, and now I'm jumping down to point number 5, Donald Trump is slowly being surrounded by increasingly good people. From time to time, I receive encouraging calls regarding this. Can these good people impact Donald Trump? We will see. In contrast, I saw no reason for an encouragement regarding the people who surround Hillary Clinton. Then he goes on in number 6 to say Trump is right on approximately 75% of the issues. I don't know where he gets that number, but that's his number. He says, I wish it was 100%. It's not. I'm in hopes that those beginnings to surround him will help him connect the dots on more issues. Then he goes on to say that he believes that Hillary Clinton is wrong on 100% of the issues. Well, we can go through some more of those issues, but I also would like to take some phone calls. So if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. And he then takes on all sorts of other issues, the kind of people that would be in the cabinet, whether or not there would be an attempt to address the massive government spending, or whether we'll just move from $20 trillion to like $30 trillion. And of course, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, he takes on the issue of the Supreme Court nominees. the 11 nominees that have been proposed by Donald Trump compared to a pretty good guess of who Hillary would have. Let's take a break, though. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take your calls right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Along the side of the road in the Pennsylvania town of Shikshinny is a small sign. On the sign appear the words, Bible Baptist Church welcomes you 1 block, and it features a Bible, a cross, and an arrow pointing in the direction of the church. The sign has been on the side of the road since 2008 when the City Council approved its placement there at the cost of the church, replacing a sign that had been standing nearby since the 1980s. The individual complaining about the sign was the lone vote on the City Council against its placement when the Council approved its placement in 2008. She also happens to be able to see the sign from her home. She filed this lawsuit 4 years after the sign was erected, alleging that the sign was a religious sign, and since the City Council approved of its placement and permitted it to reside on the side of the road, the town was violating the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. The court agreed that the sign was a religious sign, but it dismissed the lawsuit anyway. The court said that no reasonable observer could conclude that a sign pointing out the direction to a church building could be the government's way of establishing a religion in violation of the First Amendment. Rather, to quote the court, a reasonable observer would think it is a sign to a church, and nothing more. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Tomorrow's our weekend edition. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford will be looking back over the debate. We haven't had a chance to hear some of their comments. I know Kelly's going to give us an update on some of these religious liberty issues, and of course we'll be looking ahead to the vice presidential debate, as well as bringing a couple other stories that you need to hear about. Many of the articles that I've mentioned are on the website. Others are easily found, and if you find yourself having any difficulty finding some of those, certainly let us know. Been reading this piece by Jim Garlow, again, pastor of Skyline Church. The earlier one, Jason Russell, appeared in the Washington Examiner. But let's go to Nevada, KNLB. Jim, help us out here. I think you wanted to address this issue of gun control and the issue of assault weapons. So go for it.
Yes, sir. Thank you for taking my call. First of all, assault weapons per se are actually legally defined and codified in the various iterations of the Gun Control Act, the National Firearms Act that established the ATF. An assault weapon is legally defined as one that is select fire. That is, it can fire full auto and semi-auto.
Which are not the ones you and I could buy in a store.
Correct. The ones that you and I can buy in the store, the AR-15, the AK variants that are for sale to the civilian public, their politicians call them assault weapons because of cosmetic features that have nothing to do with the firing ability.
Right, like bayonets or flash suppressors and collapsible stock, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Actually, they are mechanically identical to, like the AR-15 is mechanically identical to the Ruger Mini 14. Both are semi-auto, gas-operated, firing a .223 or .556 caliber round, semi-automatic with a 30-round detachable magazine. The only difference is that the Mini 14, which the various government agencies are okay with, the only difference is that it has a stock made out of wood versus polymer.
Uh-huh. And the point I'm making is, and again, I think most people like myself that use those weapons know what you're talking about. But for the average person, what you're trying to explain, I think, is we're not talking about an automatic weapon like a machine gun. We are talking about the kind of rifle that individuals use for target practice, three gun, hunting, whatever. Yeah.
The correct definition of the AR is a modern sporting rifle.
Right. And again, when Hillary talks about these military-style weapons, she's trying to make it all seem like anybody that has anything that has, for example, a magazine or a flash suppressor or a collapsible stock. These are all in the same category. And I think you've actually done a very good job of explaining that they're not.
Now, don't get me wrong. Any select fire weapon manufactured before 1986 is classified as a Class 3 weapon, and you can legally own those.
Well, that's true. You have to fill out forms and everything. Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of paperwork. I personally agree with Mr. Trump's position on this, that, my driver's license, which is not a constitutionally guaranteed right, by the way, is good in all 50 states. Why shouldn't my concealed weapons license be good in all 50 states?
Yeah, good point. You've got some good points, Jim. I appreciate you joining us. I want to give as many people a chance, since we're getting close on time, to educate us and to help us a little bit more. So thank you for calling in with that information. Let's head out to North Carolina and go to Bill real quickly. What would you like to add to our conversation today?
Sir, just calling back from yesterday. As far as the debate topic, I was considering it. Have they ever debated whether or not the Middle East, the hottest points in the world, would be susceptible to a female president versus a male president? And what does she think she can achieve by talking to people that will not respect her because of her gender?
I know that question will never be asked. It is a question in the back of the minds of at least some individuals. We do have some female presidents or prime ministers that have tried to interact with people in the Middle East from other countries, but it's a question that's probably worth a conversation, but it's one that will never take place in a debate, because I just can't imagine any moderator ever asking that question. I can't imagine Donald Trump ever bringing it up. So I appreciate you putting it on the table, because it's something to think about, given the fact that if indeed you're dealing with people from a very kind of strict or radical Muslim perspective, how effective have some of the female Secretary of States been, and how effective will a president be? Again, it's a question nobody's going to ask, and so nothing else, Bill. I'm glad you put it on the table, just so people can at least think it through for a little bit. Let's go to the state of Illinois for just a few more minutes. We don't have a lot of time, but Jonathan, I wanted to hear from you.
Oh, hello. How you doing, sir?
Very good. What would you like to add to our conversation? Having trouble hearing from Jonathan here. Go ahead. Don't listen to your radio. There's a delay, but just talk to us.
Oh, let me turn my radio off.
That'll help. Let me just mention that we do have a delay. That's every once in a while somebody says
can you
something.
hear me now?
Yeah, go for it.
Is my voice able to be heard now?
Yes, I can hear you very well. Go ahead.
Oh yeah. No, I was just asking the lady a question as because I heard you talking about guns earlier. You know what I'm saying? And I was wanting to know, you know what I'm saying, scientifically or you know what I'm saying, statistically, who are the people that's committing these crimes with these guns, and if so, who are you trying to take guns from?
And I would not want to take guns from anybody,
or
but
whatnot, or whatever.
Okay, good point. You know, Hillary Clinton says, I want to take guns out of the hands of individuals. And again, I think all of us would say, look, if an individual is committed a felony, we oftentimes, for a lot of very good reasons, believe that they should not have access to firearms and those kinds of things. But I think we should all be a little bit concerned when you hear people say, I want to take guns out of the hands of people, because you say, well, which people would those be then? Would those be people like me, people like my friends, people that go to gun ranges? And you start down that road, it's one of the big concerns. And it's a question that I don't think Donald Trump's going to follow up on. But we will see. I suspect, as I predicted just a few minutes ago, and I will lay this prediction out right now, that there will probably be a much more robust debate about guns and gun control and the Second Amendment on the vice presidential debate next week. And the reason for that is you have two individuals who are strikingly different in their viewpoints on this particular issue. And because of the issue of police shootings and Black Lives Matter and a variety of other things, I think we're going to probably have that debate. So we will see if that is the case. And if so, probably get back into this issue. But if you'd like to read a little bit more about some of the facts and figures on this issue of Second Amendment issues, I would again commend to you a piece by Jason Russell. It appeared just 2 days ago in the Washington Examiner. I like how it's written. Rifles, 99% of the gun control debate, only 2% of the murders. And, of course, we had a little bit of education there from Jim in Nevada, and probably will have that opportunity in the future. Let me just mention all those articles are available on the website, pointofview.net, and that's a place where you can also educate yourself about this upcoming election, the Pray, Organize, and Vote election resources. I want to thank Andrew, Catherine, and Shamila for their help behind the scenes. We certainly encourage you to join us tomorrow for our Friday weekend edition. We'll see you then.
This election has been one of the most divisive in history. Even close friends have been driven apart because they dared support the wrong candidate. Jesus said the world would know his disciples by how they love each other. I'm asking you to do something today as a sign of unity. Step up and support the Truth Team at Point of View Radio so we can be a beacon of truth in 2016 and beyond. America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. Visit pointofview.net. Make a difference by giving as generously as you can, or call us 800-347-5151. Our next president will likely appoint at least 2 Supreme Court justices, maybe even more. We need each other, and I believe that we need Point of View, and Point of View needs you to invest in the mission. Please join us today. pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I'm constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.